The wind had a strange edge that morning, cold and uneasy, like something alive was moving through the pines. The mountain man felt it before he saw anything, an instinct that made him slow his steps, his boots crunching lightly against the frost-hardened earth. His cabin stood ahead, half hidden by drifting fog and tall spruce. Smoke curled from the chimney, though he hadn't lit a fire in days. He stopped. The forest was too quiet. No sound of ravens, no wind against the logs. Just stillness. When he stepped closer, the smell hit him first, burned wood and something else, sharp and sour, the scent of scorched skin. He frowned, hand tightening around the old rifle he always carried. He moved around the cabin, eyes narrowing at the porch. That's when he saw her, a woman, hanging upside down from one of the roof beams, her wrists bound with rough rope. Blonde hair matted with ash and dirt, swinging gently in the cold air. Her dress torn, bare feet bruised. For a long moment he couldn't move. He had seen death before, plenty of it, but not like this. Not here. Above her head, burned deep into the wood, were two words, *Apache lover. The letters were uneven, scorched by fire, the kind that spoke of anger, of someone wanting their message to last. He felt his chest tighten. This was hate carved into timber. He lowered the rifle and took a cautious step forward. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked blue. He reached out, touched her shoulder, warm, not dead, not yet. "Hey," he muttered, voice low, rough from years of silence. "You still with me?" A faint sound came from her throat, barely a breath. He grabbed his knife, cut the rope, caught her before she hit the ground. Her body was light, limp as a rag doll, but her chest moved, slow, uneven, alive. He looked around the clearing again, every muscle wired tight. No tracks, no horses, no sign of anyone. Whoever did this had vanished into the trees. He lifted her into his arms, the cold biting through his coat, and pushed the cabin door open. The fire was still burning inside, as if waiting for him, as if someone wanted him to find her. He didn't know who she was, or why she was left like that. But the mountains were never kind to the curious, and he was already in too deep. He laid her down gently on the floor beside the fire, the warmth flickering against her pale skin. Her breathing was faint, the kind that made a man hold his own breath to listen for it. He tore an old blanket in half and wrapped her in it, checking her pulse with rough, trembling fingers. She was alive, but barely. Whoever had done this had meant for her to die slow, meant for him to find her that way. That much he could feel. He poured water from a kettle, the metal hissing when it met the coals. Her wrists were swollen, deep purple marks where the rope had bitten into her skin. He cut the bindings, rubbed her hands between his palms to bring back the warmth. She groaned once, the sound weak, like something breaking loose inside her chest. "Easy now," he murmured. The words came out strange, rusty. He hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks, maybe months. He lived alone because it was easier that way. No noise, no lies, no faces to remember. Just the wind, the trees, and the ache of old mistakes. But now she was here, dropped into his world like some cruel test from above. When he looked at her again, the firelight caught the edges of her hair, blonde, tangled, but still bright under the soot. Her face was scratched, streaked with mud and dried blood. She looked too young to have seen that kind of hate. Her lips moved slightly and he leaned closer. A word came out, soft, broken. "Water." He lifted her head carefully, holding a tin cup to her mouth. She drank a little, coughed, then tried again. He watched her throat move, her eyelids flutter, the faint spark of life returning. When she opened her eyes, they were gray, fogged with confusion and fear. She stared at him, then around the cabin, as if trying to piece together where she was. "You're safe," he said quietly, "for now." Her gaze fell to the fire, then to her arms. The bruises made her flinch. She looked back at him, her voice faint and raw. "You cut me down." He nodded. "Found you hanging off my roof." Her breathing hitched. She looked away, whispering something he couldn't catch. He leaned closer. "What was that?" "They said they'd come back," she rasped. He straightened slowly, glancing at the door. The wind pressed against it, making the wood creak. He had seen enough cruelty in his life to know she wasn't lying. "Who?" he asked. Her eyes flicked toward the window, the trees beyond. "Men from town." He poured her more water and handed it to her again. What did they want? She hesitated, then looked up at him, voice trembling. To make an example. The words settled heavy between them. He didn't need to ask what kind of example. He'd seen the mark burned into his roof, those two words, Apache lover. They didn't just hang her for punishment. They hung her to send a message. He sat back on his heels, rubbing his hands together. You got a name? Her lips parted, but no sound came. She swallowed hard, then finally said, Claire. He nodded once. You can rest here till you're strong enough to walk. She studied him for a moment, as if weighing whether to trust him. You're not with them, she said. No, he replied. I don't ride with anyone. Her shoulders eased a little, but her eyes still darted to the windows like a cornered animal waiting for the next blow. He stood up, crossed to the window, and looked out at the dark. The forest was still again, but stillness up here didn't mean safety. It meant the next thing was just waiting to happen. He turned back to her. They see you alive, they'll finish what they started. She didn't answer, just stared into the fire. The flames painted her face gold, softening the bruises. They think I'm dead, she said finally. They'll move on. He didn't believe that, and neither did she. The kind of men who burned words into wood didn't forget. He tossed another log into the fire. You got family? She shook her head slowly. Not anymore. Town? Cedar Hollow. Her voice caught as she said it, and he saw something flicker across her face, grief, anger, maybe both. He'd heard of Cedar Hollow, a mining town half a day's ride east. Rough place, mostly drifters, men with guns and no patience. It didn't take much to start a fire there. One rumor, one whisper, and a crowd would follow. What you do to earn that kind of hate? He asked, nodding toward the burned letters. Her eyes glistened in the light. I loved the wrong man. He didn't ask more, not then. Her voice was trembling, but not from fear. There was something else beneath it, shame, maybe, or the memory of someone she wasn't ready to talk about. He went back to his chair by the door, rifle leaning close at hand. The night outside deepened. The wind rose again, carrying the distant cry of something wild. He listened, watching her drift in and out of sleep by the fire. She looked peaceful for a moment, but he knew peace wouldn't last long in these mountains. He thought of the men who had done this. What kind of rage it took to hang a woman and carve words like that above her. He'd seen mobs before, people who thought justice was something they could build out of fear. He'd once been part of one long ago. The thought sat heavy in his gut, twisting. Maybe that's why he couldn't walk away from her. Maybe saving her was the one thing he could still do right. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the door as the firelight flickered across the room. Outside, something moved, branches snapping softly. His hand found the rifle without thinking. He waited, eyes narrowing, breath steady. Then silence. He stayed that way a long time, the fire burning low, the woman breathing quietly behind him. The cabin felt smaller than ever. Each creak of the timbers sounded like a whisper. He didn't know if the men from Cedar Hollow would come tonight, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever trouble she carried, it had already found him. And the mountains, cold and cruel as they were, had no patience for mercy. The morning came gray and still, the kind of silence that hangs heavy before a storm. The fire had burned down to embers, and the air inside the cabin carried the faint scent of smoke and pine. The man hadn't slept much. Every time the wind shifted, he thought he heard footsteps outside. He sat in his chair by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the line of trees fade into the mist. Claire stirred on the floor near the hearth, wrapped in blankets. She blinked against the light seeping through the cracks in the wall, her face pale but calmer than the night before. The bruises on her wrists were darker now, and her voice was a rasp when she spoke. You kept watch all night. He didn't answer, just poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. You're still breathing, that's reason enough. She took the cup with both hands, sipping slowly. Her eyes moved over the cabin, the shelves of tools, the bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the rifle propped near the door. It wasn't a place meant for comfort. It was meant for survival. You live here alone? She asked quietly. For a long time now, he said. Why? He looked away, his jaw tightening. Same reason most folks leave town, I stopped belonging. Claire didn't press. She understood that kind of silence, she'd lived under it too. For a while, the only sound between them was the creak of the logs as the cabin warmed. When he stepped outside to fetch water, the cold bit deep. The sun was hidden behind low clouds, and the forest smelled of damp earth and old snow. He filled the bucket from the stream and scanned the ridge beyond. There were prints along the trail, fresh ones half covered by frost, not animals, boots. He stood there for a moment, every instinct tightening like a wire. Then he turned back toward the cabin, water sloshing in his grip. Inside, Claire was sitting up, staring into the fire. Her hair, though tangled and burned at the ends, caught the light in a soft halo. She looked up as he entered. "You found something." "Tracks," he said, setting the bucket down. "They're close." Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "They said they'd make sure no one helped me." He met her eyes, steady and cold. "Then they'll regret trying." She looked away, and for a moment neither spoke. The tension sat between them like smoke. Finally, she said, "You don't even know who I am. Why help me?" He crouched beside the fire, poking at the coals. "Maybe I used to be one of them." Her brow furrowed. "One of who? The kind who follow the crowd. The kind who think punishment makes the world right." He stood again, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "I've done things I don't forget. So when I see someone strung up for nothing more than love, I don't walk away." The words sank into the air and she said nothing, but her breathing steadied. He spent the next few hours reinforcing the door, checking the rifle and stacking wood inside. The sky outside darkened to a heavy gray, thick with snow. It wasn't long before flakes began to drift, soft at first, then faster, swirling like ash. The cabin grew dim, and the world beyond it disappeared in white. Claire tried to help where she could, though she moved carefully, still weak. She folded the blankets, swept the floor, and even smiled once when he muttered that she was tidying a place made of dirt and bark. "It's something to do," she said, her voice faint but warmer. As the storm deepened, the sound of the wind grew like a low howl around the cabin. He lit the lantern and placed it on the table between them. The glow touched her face gently, revealing the marks of exhaustion and strength both. "You said you loved the wrong man," he said suddenly. Her eyes flicked up and he saw pain there, not sharp, but old, heavy. "He wasn't wrong," she said. "Just born in the wrong skin." He understood before she said more. She didn't need to explain. The burned words above his roof had told enough of the story. "The people in Cedar Hollow didn't take kindly to difference," she continued. "He worked for my father once, years ago, kindest man I ever met. When the town found out we were together, they called it sin. When my father found out, he called it shame." The mountain man leaned back against the wall, his face unreadable. "They came for me one night," she said softly, "dragged me from the house. He tried to stop them. They beat him until I couldn't recognize him. Then they told me to leave town or I'd hang next to him." Her voice broke then, but she swallowed it down. "I thought running would save me, but hate travels fast when it wants to." He stared into the fire, jaw clenched. The flames popped, sending sparks toward the stone hearth. "You're not the first to run from the world," he said finally. "But few make it this far." She studied him for a long time, her expression caught between gratitude and sorrow. "Do you ever go back?" He shook his head. "There's nothing down there for me but ghosts." A gust of wind slammed against the cabin wall, rattling the windows. The horses outside whinnied in panic. He moved to the door, listening, his hand hovering over the latch. The snow was falling hard now, the kind that buried sound and tracks alike. But beneath the wind he caught something else, a muffled thud, the creak of leather. He turned to Claire. "Get away from the window." Her eyes widened, but she obeyed, crouching near the hearth. He grabbed the rifle and peered through the crack in the boards. At first there was only snow. Then a shadow moved at the tree line, 2 men, maybe 3, dark figures half swallowed by the storm. "They found you," he whispered. Claire's face went pale. "They won't stop." He nodded, every part of him cold and alert. He'd seen men like that before, men who came in the dark and left ruin behind. He checked the rifle's chamber, his movements slow and steady. "You stay low," he said quietly. "If they try the door, I'll end it quick." The storm roared louder, masking every sound but the crackle of the fire. For a moment the two of them waited, listening to the wind scrape across the logs. Then faintly a knock, slow, deliberate, mocking. The man didn't move. He leveled the rifle toward the door, finger on the trigger. The knock came again, followed by a voice, rough and smiling. "Evenin', mountain man. We come for what's ours." Claire's hand found the edge of his sleeve, trembling. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the door. The world outside was a blur of white and shadow, but inside the fire burned low and steady, throwing light across their faces. He said nothing, just waited, the silence stretching thin as wire. When the next sound came, it wasn't a knock. It was the crunch of boots in the snow, circling the cabin. Snow hammered against the cabin walls like a drumbeat, steady and violent. The man stayed crouched by the window, eyes sharp, breath slow. Through the frost-covered glass, he could barely make out the shapes moving in the white, two, maybe three men, wrapped in heavy coats, rifles slung across their shoulders. They circled the cabin the way wolves did before a kill. Claire sat near the hearth, clutching the blanket close. Her face was pale, her eyes fixed on the door as if it could come alive and open on its own. The firelight trembled across her skin, painting her fear in gold and shadow. "They won't go away," she whispered. He didn't look at her. "They'll try to make me open that door first." A voice outside called through the wind, low and sharp. "You got something of ours in there, friend. Best you hand her over before we come take her." He stayed silent, shifting slightly to see better through the crack between the boards. One man stood near the porch, hat pulled low. Another moved toward the side window, crunching through the snow. The third he couldn't see, but he could hear the faint jingle of spurs near the barn. Claire's breathing quickened. "They'll burn it," she said, her voice trembling. "That's what they do when someone hides me." The man turned to her then, his eyes dark and calm. "Not this place," he said. He moved across the room quickly, pulling down the rifle from the mantel, loading it with quiet precision. The sound of the bullets sliding into place filled the air like small thunder. "You stay behind the stove," he told her. "If I fall, you run through the back." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She nodded once weakly and crawled to the shadowed corner beside the hearth. Outside, the man with the low hat shouted again. "Ain't no need for this to get ugly. She's marked, same as the rest. You can't change what she did." The mountain man's jaw tightened. "What she did," he muttered under his breath, "was live." He leaned closer to the window, his finger hovering near the trigger. Through the snow, one of the men was approaching the porch, slow but sure. The man waited until he saw the glint of metal, a rifle barrel lifting. He fired first. The shot cracked through the storm like lightning. The figure outside dropped, disappearing into the drift. The other two scattered for cover, shouting curses that melted into the roar of the wind. Inside, the smoke from his rifle mingled with the wood smoke from the fire. Claire covered her mouth, trying not to gasp. For a few heartbeats, everything went still again. Then from the right side of the cabin, another voice shouted, "You'll pay for that, hermit." A shot blasted through the window, splintering wood. He ducked low, glass and snow spraying across the floor. He waited, counting breaths. The snow made it hard for sound to travel. Every movement outside felt closer than it was. He peered through the hole in the wall, caught a glimpse of motion, and fired again. The echo rolled through the valley, fading into silence. Then faintly, a groan. Someone hit, but not dead. Claire flinched at every noise, but her eyes stayed on him. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even shaking anymore. It was as if the fear had burned out of her, leaving only something raw and hollow. The man turned to her briefly. "You all right?" She nodded, voice steady. "You've done this before." He didn't answer. The truth was too heavy for words. A thud shook the back wall. He spun around just in time to see the door to the lean-to creek open, a figure pushing through. Before the intruder could raise his gun, the mountain man was on him. The rifle went off mid-grapple, the sound deafening in the small space. The two men crashed into the woodpile, fists and boots colliding in a blur of movement. Outside, another shot rang out, hitting the edge of the doorframe. Snow poured through the cracks, mixing with smoke and sweat. He slammed his fist into the man's jaw, hard enough to send him sprawling into the snow. Then he snatched the man's revolver, turned, and fired through the doorway. The last figure outside stumbled, fell, and didn't get up. For a long moment the only sound was the storm. Then, slowly, he lowered the gun, breathing hard. Claire stood up, trembling but alive. She moved to the window, peering through the shattered glass. "Are they gone?" He didn't answer right away. He stepped outside, boots crunching through blood and snow. The cold hit him like knives, but he didn't care. The bodies were half buried already, the storm claiming them. One was still alive, clutching his side, eyes full of rage. The man crouched beside him, voice low. "Why her?" The dying man's lips twisted. "Because she forgot her place." The mountain man stared at him for a moment, then looked toward the burned mark above his porch, the words Apache lover half hidden by snow. "Seems to me," he said quietly, "you all forgot yours." He stood and left the man there, letting the wind finish what had started. When he came back inside, Claire was by the fire again, her hands clasped together. He shut the door, barring it tight, then tossed his coat aside. His breath came in clouds. She looked up at him, searching his face for something she couldn't name. "They won't stop," she said softly. "Even if these men don't return, there'll be others. They'll find the bodies, they'll come." He rubbed his hands over his face, the skin rough with dirt and blood. "Then I'll be ready." She shook her head, voice trembling. "You can't fight the whole town." He looked at her, really looked at her, this woman beaten and branded by hate, yet still standing. "Maybe not," he said, "but I can make it cost them more than they're willing to pay." The fire cracked between them, throwing sparks toward the ceiling. The warmth should have felt comforting, but it didn't. It only reminded them how cold the world outside had become. Claire turned her gaze toward the window. The snow had covered the tracks, erased the blood, silenced the violence that had just happened. It was like the mountain itself had swallowed the evidence, leaving only the cabin and two souls who didn't belong anywhere else. She drew the blanket closer, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You didn't have to help me," she whispered. He stared into the fire, his voice low. "Maybe I did." Outside, the wind howled again, echoing down the valley like a warning or a promise. He sat near the door, rifle across his knees, watching the flames dance on the walls. The snow would bury the dead by morning. The world would look clean again, but he knew better. The mountain never forgot what men did upon it, and neither did he. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the mountains blanketed in white silence. The world outside looked untouched, as if nothing violent had happened there at all. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, rising into a pale blue sky. But inside the cabin, the air still felt heavy, thick with gunpowder, blood, and the kind of quiet that follows death. The man sat by the door with his rifle resting against his leg, his face half lit by the dull glow of the fire. He hadn't slept. His eyes kept drifting toward the window, where the snow shimmered under the morning light. Claire moved slowly around the cabin, gathering wood, keeping herself busy. Her hands shook now and then, but she hid it well. "They'll come looking for them," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "I know. They'll come soon. Then we'll be gone before they do." She stopped at that, turning toward him. "Gone. Where could we go? They'll search every cabin between here and Cedar Hollow." He met her gaze for the first time since dawn. His voice was calm but carried something deeper beneath it, a weariness that sounded like truth. "There's an old trapper's route north. It runs through the cliffs. No one travels it in winter. It'll keep us hidden." She hesitated, watching him as he stood and gathered supplies, dried meat, a flask of water, a blanket rolled tight. The way he moved, precise and steady, told her he had done this before. He was a man who knew how to vanish. As she watched him pack, a thought took root in her mind. "You've run before," she said softly. He paused, his hand still for a moment. Then he nodded once. "A long time ago." "From what?" He looked at the floor, his voice low. "From myself. The wind outside moaned faintly through the trees. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You saved me," she whispered. "You didn't have to." He gave a small shake of his head. "Don't thank me yet." When he opened the door, the brightness was almost blinding. The snow reflected the sunlight like glass, cutting across the clearing in shimmering waves. The bodies were buried under the drift now, just faint mounds marking where they had fallen. He scanned the tree line, every shadow a possible threat. Nothing moved but the branches swaying under their frozen weight. "Bundle up," he said. "We move now." They left the cabin quietly, their boots crunching through the crusted snow. The mountains rose around them, tall and unforgiving, but he knew every ridge, every hollow. Claire followed close behind, her steps light, her breath misting in the cold. The trail wound through pines and narrow passes, the sound of their movement swallowed by the forest. Hours passed. The silence between them felt heavy but not uncomfortable. She was thinking, he could tell. Every so often she looked up at him as if weighing a question she couldn't ask. Finally, she spoke. "You said you used to be like them. What did you mean?" He didn't answer right away. His boots crunched over ice, his eyes scanning ahead. Then quietly he said, "I was part of a posse once. We went after a man accused of stealing cattle. Turned out the man hadn't stolen anything. But the boys were drunk, angry. They wanted blood more than truth. I didn't stop them. Didn't say a word when they dragged him through the dirt and left him hanging." She stopped walking, staring at him. The cold air stung her lungs. "You watched," he nodded, his jaw hard. "Watched and did nothing. That's worse than doing it yourself." Claire looked down at the snow, her voice trembling. "So this, helping me, it's your penance." "Maybe," he said. "Maybe it's the first thing that's felt right in years." They kept walking. The sky darkened with clouds again, though it wasn't yet evening. Snow began to fall, soft and thin. After a while, the trail opened into a clearing that overlooked the valley. From there they could see the world stretched wide, mountains fading into distance, rivers glinting like glass veins. She stopped and looked back. The cabin was gone now, hidden by the trees and snow. "It feels like it's watching us," she said. He followed her gaze. "Places like that don't forget, but they don't forgive either." She turned toward him. "And you, do you forgive yourself?" He didn't answer. The look in his eyes was enough. By the time night fell, they had reached a small cave tucked between the cliffs. He built a fire inside, shielding it from the wind. The glow flickered across the rock walls, painting their faces in amber light. Claire sat close, her hands stretched toward the flames. She still looked fragile, but something in her had hardened too, like steel forged in the fire of her pain. She watched him as he adjusted his coat and loaded his rifle again. "Do you think they'll find the cabin?" "Eventually. And when they do, they'll know someone fought back. That'll slow them down." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that wasn't joy but understanding. "You're not the man you were." He stared into the fire. "Maybe not, but the world doesn't care what kind of man I am, only what I've done." The wind outside howled through the cliffs. The fire cracked softly, its warmth a fragile shield against the cold. Claire lay down, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. The man stayed awake, staring into the flames, lost in the memories that refused to let him rest. In the quiet, her voice drifted softly from the darkness. "You think people can change?" He looked up, eyes reflecting the glow. "Only if they stop running." She turned toward him, half smiling. "Then maybe we're both trying." He didn't reply, but something in his face shifted, just a flicker, a thaw in the hard lines carved by years of solitude. He leaned back against the stone wall, rifle beside him, listening to the storm building again outside. The snow fell harder, whispering across the entrance of the cave. It covered their footprints, erased the trail, hid them from the world. Inside, the light burned steady, small but stubborn, refusing to die. The mountain man watched it until his eyes grew heavy. The flames danced like memories, faces, voices, moments long gone. He had spent years trying to bury them, but now, with her there beside the fire, something in him began to shift. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just surviving. He was protecting something. And that made all the difference. The fire had burned low by morning, leaving only a faint orange glow in the ashes. The cave was quiet except for the soft rhythm of Claire's breathing. Outside, the storm had calmed, leaving the world buried under a thick, glistening silence. The mountain man pushed himself up slowly, his back aching, the stiffness of the cold creeping into his bones. He walked to the mouth of the cave and looked out. The forest below was ghostly, white trees, frozen streams, the distant echo of wind whispering through canyons. He stood there for a long while scanning the valley. Tracks led away from the ridge, faint but fresh. Horses. He counted 4, maybe 5 sets. They weren't far. He turned back toward the fire and knelt beside Claire. "Wake up," he said gently. "We've got to move." Her eyes fluttered open, dazed at first. Then the memory hit and fear flickered through them. "They found us," he nodded once. "Not yet, but they will. They're close." She sat up quickly, pulling her coat around her shoulders. "How can they keep finding us?" "Men like that always think the world belongs to them," he said, tossing dirt onto the embers to kill the glow. "They don't stop till someone makes them." She followed him as he stepped outside into the light. The air was sharp, cold enough to sting their lungs. The snow came up to their knees in some places, but the path north would take them to higher ground, harder to track, harder to breathe. He started walking, boots crunching softly, the rifle slung across his shoulder. Claire followed close, her scarf pulled over her mouth, her steps small but determined. The climb was slow. Every few minutes he stopped to listen. Once he caught a sound, the faint crack of a branch far below. He motioned for her to keep quiet. They pressed on until they reached a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Below, smoke curled from a fire, barely visible. The riders had camped for the night. He crouched low, studying them from the distance. "5 of them," he muttered. "They must have found the bodies at the cabin." Claire crouched beside him, shivering. "Can we go around them?" "Not with the snow this deep," he said. "They'd spot us easy." He thought for a moment, eyes cold and steady. "We wait until dark." The day crawled by slowly. They sheltered beneath the trees, the air heavy with silence. Claire tried to rest, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. Every sound, a gust of wind, the creak of ice, made her flinch. The man sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the valley below. He didn't seem afraid, just focused, like someone who had already accepted what had to be done. When the light finally began to fade, he stood. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Don't move till I come back." Her hand shot out, grabbing his arm. "You can't face them all." He looked down at her, his eyes calm but unyielding. "You think they'll stop if we run again?" She said nothing. He took her silence as answer and turned toward the slope. Snow muffled his footsteps as he moved down toward the valley. Claire watched him until the darkness swallowed his shape. Then she sat back, heart pounding, every muscle tight with dread. Time stretched endlessly. The forest felt alive with unseen things, the soft groan of branches, the distant rumble of shifting ice. Then faintly, a sound cut through the cold air. One gunshot, then another. Silence. A third came after a long pause, and then nothing. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to run to him to see, but fear anchored her where she was. Minutes dragged by like hours. Then through the falling snow, a shadow appeared. He was climbing back up the ridge, moving slower now, shoulders heavy. When he reached her, she saw blood on his coat, not his own, but dark and frozen. "It's done," he said simply. She stared at him, trying to read his face. "All of them?" He nodded once. "They won't follow us anymore." For a long moment, neither spoke. The forest around them was quiet again, almost peaceful. She wanted to feel relief, but something in his voice made her chest tighten. It wasn't victory she heard. It was sorrow. He turned away from her, looking out over the valley below. The sky was a deep indigo now, the last of the light fading behind the peaks. "We should keep moving," he said. "There's a cabin a few miles north, an old trading post. We can rest there." She followed him again through the snow, but this time her steps were slower. The cold bit deeper, but her thoughts were far away. She couldn't stop thinking about the look in his eyes when he came back. The kind of look a man wears when he's been reminded of everything he once was. By the time they reached the old trading post, night had fallen completely. The place was abandoned, its roof half-caved, the walls gray with age. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and they stepped inside. Dust and frost covered everything. It was cold, but it was shelter. He started a small fire in the corner, careful to keep it low. The light flickered across the broken shelves and cracked window panes. Claire sat close, hands extended toward the warmth. "You shouldn't have gone alone," she said quietly. He looked at her across the fire, his face worn and hollow. "Didn't have a choice." She studied him for a moment, then said softly, "You could have killed them all the night they came to your cabin. You didn't." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Didn't need to then." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly between them. Outside, the wind had died down, and the moonlight spilled through the broken roof. Snowflakes drifted down like ash, glowing silver in the dim light. Claire finally broke the silence. "You could come with me," she said. "When this is over, there's land out west where no one knows our names." He stared at the fire, his hands folded loosely in his lap. "Maybe. You've done enough running," she whispered. "You deserve to live." He lifted his eyes to hers, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something unguarded there. The weight he carried wasn't just from the past few days. It was years of regret, of silence, of trying to atone in a world that never forgave. The fire flickered lower, and he reached out to toss another log on. The light caught his face, softening the hard lines. "You get some rest," he said. "We'll move at first light." She lay down beside the fire, exhaustion finally pulling her under. He stayed awake, listening to the night, to the faint whistle of wind through the cracks in the roof. His eyes drifted toward her, peaceful now, breathing slow and even. He looked away, toward the snow-covered world beyond the door. Somewhere out there, more men would hear what happened. More would come. That was the way of things. But for now, for this small, fragile moment, there was only quiet. He leaned back against the wall, rifle resting across his lap, and let his eyes close, not in sleep, but in the kind of stillness a man finds when he's finally made peace with the storm inside him.